Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I know it's been a busy week for everybody in the press corps and others, as we've had a number of important votes. Today, I'm here with City Attorney Pete Holmes to share with you some of the actions that the city will take to protect the will of Seattle voters and to make sure we can keep investing in transit, transportation safety, and to keep building the city of the future. Less than a decade ago, Seattleites voted to tax themselves to invest in transit and really critical transportation projects. On Tuesday, Seattle voted for transit, for safer roads, for bike and pedestrian safety, for free ORCA, and for our young people and low-income residents. And every day in Seattle, we vote with our ballot, not just with our ballot, but we vote with our ridership. We are one of the few major cities where transit use is going up. Our transit ridership is critical to who we are as a city. It is critical to equity. We need to do what we have to do to protect that. So while there's still votes left to count, we know that nearly 57% of King County voters rejected this irresponsible and dangerous measure. I want to thank everybody who works so hard to protect transit, transportation safety, and more connected region. I'm also really grateful to everyone in this room that I know worked so hard to make sure that we could do what we needed to do to protect that. Unfortunately, this latest gambit by Tim Eyman was approved statewide by voters. As we said before, the cuts required by this initiative would be potentially catastrophic for Seattle and our region at a time when we need to invest in more transit, not less transit. The impact on this initiative is a $24 million cut from the Seattle Transportation Benefit District for bus service and ORCA Opportunity passes, and $8 million in cuts for basic services. And this is happening right in the middle of the Seattle squeeze, when we're doing everything we can to get people out of their cars and onto buses, on their bikes, walking. We need to make sure we have more transit and more pedestrian and bike safety. Our residents need to be able to make the choice that they voted to make, that they voted to tax themselves to make. Our youth and our low-income seniors, they need to be able to get around this great city, to work, to school, to appointments. Those ORCA passes are lifelines for them. Our neighbors with disabilities and seniors literally rely on this transportation for basic life needs. Our residents of every neighborhood need their bus lines to run frequently and all hours of the day. And it's proven, if we have transit where people live and it goes where they want to get, and it comes when they need it, they get on it. It is not the time to cut. We also need to fix our potholes so that transit and people can move safely. With I-976 going into effect, it will hurt a range of things for the public. There are immediate and irreparable injuries to our city. It will cut more than 100,000 hours of bus service. 12,000 high school students will lose the benefit of an ORCA pass. 1,500 low-income residents will lose their transit access. Fewer potholes will get fixed, and our roads will become more dangerous. As mayor, my core job is to protect the people, the will of Seattle voters, and critical services like this. Today, with City Attorney Pete Holmes, who you will hear from in a minute, we are announcing that we will file litigation to fight these devastating impacts. I-976 is not only unfair, it is not only unwise, it is unconstitutional. We respect the right of voters in other communities to decide what is best for their communities. But the state should not override the will of Seattle voters and tell us how to invest our tax dollars in our priorities. The Seattle Transportation Benefit District is a taxing authority that was granted to Seattle, and we believe we have a strong case in defending that. Other cities and communities use that same power to address their needs in their community, and they will have to decide how they go forward. In recent weeks, I've had the honor of meeting with City Attorney Pete Holmes and his team as we plotted a strategy should this initiative pass. We know we need to move forward as quickly as we can to secure an injunction to prevent the irreparable harm to our most vulnerable residents before this can go into effect. While no one can be 100% sure on what will happen in any court action, I have a lot of confidence in our lawyers and in our theory and in our courts. The biggest impact to our cities will be the loss of the voter-approved $60 vehicle license fee, and that would result in the loss of more than 100,000 of bus hours, our ORCA Opportunity passes, and more than $8 million in transit capital investments. Because we buy service in March and September, our team has to work with King County closely to make sure that we avoid any disruption in services. There are long and short-term impacts. We are working on a plan to address all of those, and I'll answer some questions about what those are, but right now I'd like to turn it over to Pete Holmes, who will explain our lawsuit and what the basis of it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. It's a pleasure being here to emerge from the lawyer's war room to come and stand with you here and try to share some of our thinking. You know, I knew from the moment I read the text of Initiative I-976 that it had some fairly obvious legal problems. Had Mr. Eyman developed an initiative that was constitutional, I wouldn't be here today. We're here today because he had all of us vote on a flawed proposal. Now, I'm not willing to outline every legal argument that we will assert in our complaint to be filed next week. I can say that we are, as the mayor pointed out, going to pursue as quickly as possible a preliminary injunction asking that a judge in the King County Superior Court pause the law from taking effect until the underlying legal issues can be addressed to allow us to continue collecting these vital revenues. As our transportation director will illustrate here in just a few minutes, our city is facing a significant threat to the way the people of Seattle move around the region. The injunction is absolutely necessary to prevent this very real harm to our communities. My team has put their heads together with lawyers from King County. We spent considerable time, and we have developed a path forward. I do want to point out that we will be handling this in-house along with county lawyers. I want to point out Carolyn Boyce, a lawyer and assistant city attorney in my office, who will be the lead lawyer on litigation on behalf of the city. And she will be arguing the case about why the people of Seattle, who voted to raise their car tab fees to pay for the transit that we collectively benefit from, should be allowed to continue. I think, as the mayor pointed out, 56.7% of King County voters rejected 976, probably greater than that as we get the next ballot counts. And I only expect that percentage to increase. The Seattle residents voted to voluntarily raise their car tabs. That's one of the lies in this initiative, that it's going to allow car tabs with voter approval to move forward. It purports to undo what the Seattle voters have already voted and agreed to tax themselves on. That's why I'm filing this lawsuit, to uphold the will of Seattle voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. And I just again want to emphasize that we stand here as the mayor and city attorney, but what we're really doing is trying to protect the community and its votes for very basic services, whether it's our seniors or those who are differently abled, the people who are working hard to drive those buses and show up to serve people, the people who are building the capital infrastructure projects themselves, or the people, the tens of thousands of people who commute every day into this great city choosing transit. That's why we're here, is to protect that. With that, we'll take if there's any questions.
You mentioned now a few times voters approving the benefit district. Why is that different than other local preemptions that already exist in the state? For example, Seattle can't pass rent control, or Seattle can't do explicit gun control. Why is this uniquely illegal?
It's two things. There's more theories than that, as Pete addressed, and he may want to address this, but the state gave the city the authority to take a vote on whether it wanted taxes. So we exercise that authority. This initiative is trying to retroactively stop that through a back door. We don't think that's appropriate. We don't think it's right. We don't think it's constitutional.
The TBD expires next year anyway. I know the plan obviously was to renew it, but if this injunction and if this lawsuit isn't successful, is there a backup plan at this point?
We have a range of plans for every short-term, medium-term, and long-term issue. And so we are going to have to take this in various increments. The first thing we need to do is to get a court to enjoin the really irreparable harms from this. We're working with counsel. I know people will ask this. We've talked to counsel already. City attorney was down there today. We actually don't believe that this budget cycle is going to be disrupted right now because of this. There is a very short-term fix that we think we can address and will make, but there's a longer-term problem that we don't need to address through the budget today.
So is this a joint lawsuit between Seattle and King County, or are you guys filing separate lawsuits?
I'll let Pete address that. He's been meeting with the council, with the county.
You bet. Yes, it's a joint lawsuit. King County and the City of Seattle are joining together to file this litigation by next week.
I know you don't want to give any details there. Are we talking single subject rules, some of the things we've seen in the past, or do you have some new strategies?
We have 3 to 4 legal strategies that we are briefing now and will be reflected in the complaint that we file next week. It does include single subject, but the bottom line is we believe that this is an unconstitutional measure in several respects. And it also, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, it completely misled the voters. The voters who thought that this was simply a $30 car tab absent voter support. This is nullifying what voters in Seattle have already agreed to tax themselves, and moreover, it also eliminates the ability to actually get that voter approval going forward. That's why I said it's not overstating it to say this proposal was a lie to voters.
So, Mayor, to be clear, you don't believe that any transportation projects have to be put on hold right now? And then the second question is, what do you think about Lisa Herbold's proposal to divert some of the rideshare money that was going to the streetcar to backfill on any transportation projects?
So there's one of the things we'll do right after this. Sam Zimbabwe's here, who can walk you through the details of all the cuts and when they would happen. There's no question that there will be irreparable harm to the city if we don't get an injunction, and that we need to plan for that. But the very short term we think we can address. And so I'm very hopeful that we get the injunction and that a court will preserve the right of voters to tax themselves.
We'll seek a hearing in front of the King County Superior Court judge once we know who our judge is, as soon as we can get it. That is our #1 goal, get the complaint filed, learn who our assigned judge is, and then to get a hearing noted in front of that judge on an expedited basis.
You can file the injunction, you can file a complaint before the results have been certified of the election.
No, we are taking some measures there, Kevin, that we know that, for instance, planning is already taking place at the state. I think you're already aware that the governor has already directed state agencies to look at downshifting in anticipation of this passing. The numbers look to be pretty clear, but no, we do not have to wait for final certification in this case. Rather, we're going to be consulting with our state counterparts and learning what their plans are with regard to collecting the taxes and the like. And so we need to work with them on that, but there are theories where we don't need to have the certified vote yet.
Is the short-term plan for filling the shortfall of transportation funding, is that just to rely on reserves, $20 million that's in reserves?
There's a combination of proposals. We're obviously going to work with the council to see what they want to address, and Sam's got a PowerPoint and more detail than many will want, but some will stay.
Address the second question about Lisa Herbold's proposal.
Same thing. We are not at a place where we need to derail City Center streetcar, because if we're able to get the injunction and continue to collect the funds, then that puts us in a different ball game. But there will be irreparable harm otherwise, and so we really want to be very careful. Right now, the immediate impact on the budget is a very relatively small one that still causes us harm because it requires us to cut in other areas, but we think that we can address it. It's about a magnitude of about $8 million.
What cuts in other areas?
That we have to work with council. The budget's with council. We'll work with them closely. Our budget director and others are already working, and Sam Zimbabwe has kind of a range of what the other cuts would look like because of the gravity of the tax cut.
So no matter how fast you file and do anything legally, there's going to be an impact to Seattle.
There's a huge impact to Seattle, and we want to make sure, we're very hopeful and confident that the courts will recognize that. I mean, the best blueprint for legal action against this is the same blueprint that has been almost every Eyman initiative where the courts have struck it down. Thank you very much for your time.
I will. So I'm Sam Zimbabwe.
Can I just
Oh
stop
yeah,
for 1
sure,
minute?
sure.
I just want to recognize that the chair of the Finance Committee, Councilmember Bagshaw, is here. We're working closely with her on walking through what the potential impacts would be for the budget, short-term and long-term, and what actually will have impact on what they're trying to do to adopt a budget. As everyone knows, she has been a huge stalwart supporter of all the transit and pedestrian and bike improvements that we've had in the city and will continue to be so. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I'm Sam Zimbabwe, the director of the Seattle Department of Transportation. I have, I think members of the press have a copy of what I'll walk through. If you don't, we might have a few more copies in the back here. Just really quickly want to give some factual information about what is affected by the potential passage of I-976, and we can talk about some of the plans to address that. So there are 99 active transportation benefit districts statewide, 62 of which collect vehicle license fees. We generate currently about through the STBD Proposition 1 funds, $54.5 million a year. 55% of the revenues in 2019 came from the sales tax, a 0.1% sales tax, which would not be affected by I-976, and 45% come from a $60 vehicle license fee. In addition, there's a $20 vehicle license fee that generates about $8 million a year. So the direct impacts for us of the potential passage of I-976 are $32 million annually, $24 million that we use to invest in transit service and capital improvements, and $8 million for basic services. That $24 million a year in transit services goes towards direct transit service, low-income access to transit, transit capital investments in speed and reliability and safety and accessibility, and then our ORCA Opportunity program through 2020. That funding lasts through 2020, would need to be reauthorized again at the end of next year, and then $8 million in ongoing basic maintenance services from the $20 vehicle license fee. We have a graphic on slide 4 of the handout that shows how our STBD funding is programmed, and this includes both the $60 vehicle license fee and the 0.1% sales tax. 79 cents of every dollar is invested right back into transit service. We buy currently about 350,000 service hours a year from through King County Metro. We fund transit capital improvements, which again goes towards safety, accessibility, speed, and reliability of our transit service throughout the city. And then we fund about 7 cents of every dollar collected goes towards our low-income access to transit for ORCA Opportunity and other fare programs. And 7 cents on every dollar goes into our fund reserves. The fund reserves are really critical as a potential ramp down of service. We can only make service changes twice a year through King County Metro. And in order to not have catastrophic, even more catastrophic and irreparable impact, we maintain our reserves in the event that the voters were not to reauthorize our spending, to enable us to ramp down service at the end of the Seattle Transit Benefit District. Slide 5 shows a breakdown of those 350,000 service hours. About 21% of that is providing peak hour service to and from downtown. About a quarter of that is funding off-peak midday, weekend, evening, midday and evening service, and then about 50% is funding Saturday and Sunday service. We know that those off-peak weekend evening services are vitally important to the full range of people who use transit in the city. Not everybody works a 9-to-5 job in downtown, and that midday, evening, weekend service is vitally important to low-income workers and people who have to be at work at a specific time, but are not as commute-driven as as I am, say. So this is where we'll have to look at what these 350,000 service hours and plan for the for what up to 100,000 hours or even more of cuts could be if we aren't able to seek an injunction. Just pivoting a little bit to the $20 vehicle license fee, slide 6 has a table of what is funded through the vehicle license, the $20 vehicle license fee. It's a combination of both basic repair and maintenance and capital funding for critically needed neighborhood and safety projects around the city. This includes, 90% of our current pothole budget and 100% of our neighborhood traffic safety funding right now. So we talked a little bit about the legal action, in terms of our next steps. We're working with council on how to address this through the 2020 budget. And then how to address both the $20 vehicle license fee and the $60 vehicle license fee that wouldn't have immediate service disruptions. We've already funded through March. We would start to spend our reserves even in the interim, but then planning for what the eventuality of major service cuts would be in March.
Sam, I'm wondering, is there an impact by the governor's announcement to freeze spending on things that haven't happened yet? Could that impact Seattle in the sense of state money that SDOT might, for projects SDOT might administer?
That's a great question. So we do currently receive grants from the state for capital projects. We're trying to understand from the state exactly what the impacts would be of the governor's announcement today, and whether that's focused on purely WSDOT projects or if it's also trickling down to where we've got grant money in projects right now.
Do you know how much you get off the top of your head?
It's discretion. So it's not necessarily formula based. It's a mix of things, but it largely goes to our major capital investments in transit. Our transit plus multimodal corridors, and so there could be some delays to our projects where we're planning major investments as well.
Does that have any impact on the Madison Bus Rapid Transit project since the County Council just approved the alignment yet?
Yeah, so we still have to do a little bit of work to understand exactly what the impacts of state, how the state is going to address our current project list.
Can you mind more detail about what the plan will be if this is upheld? And I mean, given the fact that it's already expiring next year, what the kind of replacement plan would be if there's one?
Sure, I think it's a bit premature to talk about exactly what that would look like. We know, and we've been preparing for the need to come back to voters in 2020 in any case and reauthorize what we think has been very successful and vital service. I think there's, as the mayor said, there's lots of options on the table for how to do that.
And the short-term plan, can you go into any more details? Maybe this is something for Councilor Bagshaw to address too, for backfilling this funding for this year, for 2020?
So, I think we've got some reserves. We need to understand whether or not a court will grant an injunction as we move through the budget process with the council, and I think there's lots of different ways still to work on that.
She got a one-time 2020 budget proposal here. Where's that money coming from?
So I think that's a place where we'll have to work with council. In their current, they have not put forward a proposal. We'll work with council and council central staff on exactly what that would look like, given where the funding package is, the balanced proposal that the council is already considering.
If the car tax aren't available, besides the sales tax, what other revenue sources could you use for the TBT?
There are a few others that are called out in the authorizing legislation that weren't affected by the vote.
Explore some type of business, payroll or business tax, for example.
The TBD, the only thing that's affected by the TBD, by 976 in the TBD authorization is the vehicle license fees. There are still some sources available within that, and I think that's where we would have, a discussion going forward about how to fund this overall set of activities if the vehicle license fee weren't available for us.
How would you describe your level of concern right now?
Well, I'm very concerned that we're even talking about 100,000 service hours of cut. I think that's vital transit service that has enabled the city to be the vibrant place that it is right now, and that people depend on it every day to get around. And having to talk about those potential cuts is pretty heartbreaking in a lot of ways, that we would have to consider those things. I think, so that's the immediate term. I think in the long term, we know that we're on this trajectory of transit investment and transit service that the people of Seattle really value, and we'll find ways to address that. Again, we think, as the mayor said and as the city attorney said, we think that this is unconstitutional. We can continue moving forward the way that we've been investing in transit service as a city.
If there's not an injunction by the planned budget vote, would you extend that process, or what's the
No, we're passing a budget on November 25th.
Are there no significant changes to what was expected in the transportation budget? Is there anything you can say to that?
Sure. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Sally Bagshaw, and I chair our Finance and Budget Committee, and I'm chairing the work that we are doing right now on our budget. And I want to tell you, there is nothing sadder to me than being here talking to you about, do we have to make a choice between transportation and transit or human services? And I can tell you that this is the 20th year that I have worked to oppose Tim Eyman's initiatives. And I believe that there's at least 13 or 14 now that this is where we are, having to look at changing the tax system without Mr. Eyman bringing forward anything that could look like a solution. And that is what makes me angry about this. Our budget right now is balanced. I've been working with the mayor, with our budget, the people that had brought us the mayor's budget in the first place. And rather than peanut buttering, we have looked at ways that we can really address housing, affordable housing, the homelessness issues that we're facing, public health and hygiene, and that's where we're putting in our investment. And it breaks my heart to be standing here with Sam and for him to say to me, you've got something like $32 million of transportation needs that could also likewise be cut. I find that completely unacceptable. And from my standpoint, they may be able to change my mind on this. We are not going to change our priorities around dealing with affordable housing, homelessness, the hygiene, and LEED. This is going to impact voters. We're going to have to come back and show voters how can we raise the money to do what they're asking. The transit that Sam's been talking about, the impacts, the positive impacts that we have had to get people on buses and out of cars. I refuse to let that go, but I can't do that today in this budget. We're going to have to spend time figuring that out, going back to the voters and explaining, and particularly going back to the state of Washington saying, we need your help. We knew this all last year, that this could be a problem, that voters were not liking what they were seeing in terms of how much they were having to pay on car tabs, how much they were having to pay when you considered the value of their cars. And I respect that, and we should have done something about that. But here we are now, and I am saying to you, my friends here in this city, that we're going to take care of people first, and we're going to take care of people's needs. We're going to really help address the concerns people have around those who are homeless out on our street, making sure that the LEAD program works, that we're working on a criminal justice system so that it all fits together. And by God, Sam, I'm hating to leave you out here, but that's going to be a priority that we're going to have to address in 2020. I'm sticking with the budget that we have presented, and I'm happy to talk to you further about that.
Thank you very much, everybody.